Alex, we're stoked to hear from you. I'm going to come back in 10 minutes. And so the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It was a lot of fun doing this last time, so I was excited to get invited back for this. My name is Alex. I'm a PhD candidate at Carnegie Mellon. I'm defending my thesis next month, so can't say that for too much longer. And I've been building developer tools for AI/ML the last 5 or 6 years. What I talked about last time, what I've been spending kind of the last few years on, is a platform called Zeno, which is this kind of end-to-end evaluation platform that lets you do more of this fine-grained evaluation and exploration of benchmarks. That it's a lot of fun. If you're interested in evaluation, I encourage you to take a look. But I'm actually going to be talking about something quite different today and kind of a newer project. We'll see live demo gods, hopefully are smiling down on me, on doing AI-assisted prompt editing and prompt engineering. So something that we saw again and again when we were talking to users who are using Zeno, who are doing deeper evaluation of their models, is that while the idea of having a very deep end-to-end evaluation pipeline is great, what a lot of the dirty work ends up being day to day is prompt engineering in these oftentimes larger chains. I think the whole LLM community has kind of gathered around this paradigm of these essentially data chains or text chains, where you have prompts linked up to different maybe modules like function calls or vector databases chained together. But at the end of the day, you can't get away from having to write prompts. You might have a super sophisticated chain that has broken down the tasks into little prompts and maybe whole agentic graph-based logic. In the end of the day, each one of those nodes has to be some sort of prompt, some sort of model, oftentimes a prompt to OpenAI or some local model. And when we talked to people, they said, hey, this is kind of this ad hoc process that we do, a lot of guess and check, usually start with some initial prompt, have a couple example test cases, see if they're failing, or maybe we get a new test case in production, add it to our test set, and use that to update our prompt. The super tight loop. And when you ask really good prompt engineers how they got good at prompt engineering, it's a lot of just practice, a lot of just trying it over and over again and learning the nuances of exactly how these models perform. You've probably seen blog posts about how to get good at prompting and be like, hey, just tell the model you're going to tip it $1,000, or just tell it not to be lazy, or just saying return JSON doesn't work. How about you put it in all caps and put a bunch of exclamation marks? And that got us thinking. We saw this pattern again and again when talking to people. Is this kind of like it? Is this just what prompt engineering is, and it's never going to get easier? You just have to go through this painful process of learning. But we took a look at kind of what existing processes are and sort of some of these creative processes. For example, when you're writing text, sure, writing is hard and takes a lot of time to get good at writing, but you have intelligent tools like Grammarly to help you out. Same with code. Programming is hard, takes a lot of domain knowledge and a lot of skill, but we have tools now like Copilot that make it a lot easier. The same can't really be said for prompt editing. Like prompt engineering, it kind of lives sort of in text editors, sometimes in playgrounds, but there's nothing that helps you. There's no kind of AI assistance that says, here are good heuristics, here are common ways of improving your prompts that guide you in this process. So that's kind of the premise that we went for. We've been working on this only for a few weeks, so it's a little rough around the edges, but I'd love to get your guys' feedback on this broader vision of what would it mean to have kind of AI assistance in the prompt engineering process instead of just having it for other processes like code or text editing. So I'll try to show a quick, brief demo. So here we're just going to create a new prompt and start with something simple. This could be like a custom GPT if you wanted to, or in this case, we're just going to treat it as one of the nodes in a longer pipeline. So I have one very simple prompt here that we're going to use that just tries to extract numeric scores from movie reviews, from text movie reviews. So we can do movie score extraction. So we'll start with this simple prompt. Next. And what we do first is generate a bunch of potential example inputs. Oftentimes, this won't be very useful if you have very specific domain-specific data and you can paste in your own, but at least it gives you some heuristic of like, okay, at least I know that this isn't, these are good examples, but maybe they'll be useful. In our case, we're going to be like, hey, these are good enough for this use case of potential movie reviews we might want to extract data from. So when you click next, you get into the main interface. So what you'll see, we automatically ran a model on this input. So in this case, we're using just GP 3.5 Turbo, but you can change which model you're using, and you get automatic outputs. So this looks interesting. And immediately, maybe I start thinking, hey, I want to do this in like a data pipeline. I don't need all this text. I just need the number. So I can say something like, do not return anything but the number. And I can save this prompt. It gets saved in the background. I get new outputs, which seem to be working pretty well in this somewhat simple task. Say maybe some of these examples weren't working or there was something interesting, you could then go in and update your prompt. What's interesting though, you'll see on the left here, we have these things, these suggestions that have popped up. And these are what we call editors that give you, it's kind of like Grammarly. It might say like, hey, there's a grammatical error here. Hey, you might want to reword this to be more clear. These are what we consider similar concepts, but for prompts. So these are common heuristics that given your prompt and your inputs and outputs, we can try to guide you towards better prompts. So in this example, when we hover over don't use negation, oftentimes it's just better to tell your model what it should do instead of what it shouldn't do. So we can see it actually underlines the area that it detected where you're saying do not return anything but the number. And we can actually go ahead and click apply. And it'll actually rewrite that part of the sentence with this new update. And then we can save that and run it. So we have other ones. Maybe you want to actually output JSON. So we can be like, okay, return JSON instead of a number and use the key output. So we can save this. Same thing happens. We get the new outputs, the new JSON, and we get new instructions. So we have another one that's single instruction sentences that you should maybe use instructions that are single sentences instead of compounding them. So we could apply this if we wanted to, and it split it into 2 different sentences so we can save and run. So this is early. Our editors aren't great right now, but hopefully you see over time we can start learning patterns of what good prompts are. We have other ones shortened. This one's new, and I don't know how well it works, but ideally it can keep the same meaning of your prompt, but shorten it to save you money, lower the token costs for each inference run, etc. We also have an ability to generate similar instances. So as you already saw, we kind of saturated our test set super quickly. We're not seeing any cases where it's actually going to fail. So we could add additional ones and say something like, this movie was awful. I never want to see it again. And this is interesting. It gave it an output of 0, but maybe we actually wanted to return null. So if no number is present, return null. We can save and see if this actually worked. Luckily it did. Maybe when at more of these test cases, we can actually also automatically generate data. This hasn't been working great. This part's a little rough around the edges, but you can imagine generating similar instances, similar reviews that don't have numbers or reflect this template. So you can start growing this test set. We do also have ability, as someone who cares deeply about evaluation, you can then add labels if you wanted to and start calculating more formal metrics and start doing comparison across models. So you can go kind of deeper down the more robust evaluation and checking from this initial testing phase. Yeah, so that's all I got. This is very, very early. I actually just broke it in production, but it is out there if you want to test it. And I would love any feedback on what works, what doesn't, what are maybe interesting ideas for editors or ways of generating test cases. Do you want other models? I'm very curious to see kind of what people think about this. Cool. And yeah, it's available endoftext.app. It's a little, I'll fix it right after this. So hopefully in the next like 15 minutes, the prompt isn't updating right now.
I'm going to try to keep you for 5 more minutes. So maybe in the next 20 minutes.
Perfect.
So,
yeah.
Okay, I think we got at least a couple of questions from the audience. let me start at the top. Kay says, and Apurva upvotes, love the idea. How would you keep it updated? It feels like a lot of these prompt rules keep changing as the underlying models are being updated.
Good question. So if I'm interpreting this correctly, it's how do you make sure that the prompts are still good when the underlying models are changing? It's a great question. If I understand that correctly.
Maybe you understood it correctly. I took it as like, how do you even keep the suggestions up to date given that the way the prompts are processed is different? But that might be similar.
Interesting. So the way we have it set up now is every time you save a model, it gets saved in the background as like a new version. And then all the suggestions get updated dynamically with that model and the inputs. And then some editors are actually input based. So like we have one that like checks your prompt, and if you tell it to do something, it actually checks the outputs and sees if it like matches that. So you can actually refresh, and if you have new inputs, it'll actually update the suggestions as well. If the underlying models are changing, that's hard. Ideally, maybe you could maybe we should have like a rerun for the current model. You can't really rerun it unless you change the prompt. Yeah, actually, something we ran into is even if you have temperature at 0 with OpenAI, they use a mixture of experts model, so it's not deterministic. So that's something actually we were interested in. Like maybe we track how many times the output changes for the same model and give you some count of how I don't know, unreliable it is.
Yeah, like the sensitivity of it or something.
Yeah.
So a few people are saying, Mo is asking, this tool is accessible to test. I think the answer is yes. That might have been before you put up the slide. Muhammad is asking, nice idea. There is some research about using EA to evolve prompts automatically. EA, I imagine, he means evolutionary algorithms. It would be a nice feature here. And that's a little bit closer to what I had in mind you might do. Have you considered doing things like that? Are you thinking about integrating?
We've looked at.
Evolution?
I did some literature review. Like I know there's a DeepMind paper that's kind of interesting that uses some sort of genetic algorithm to like mutate the prompts, test them, etc. I think I find those very interesting. I think they mismatch a little bit with the reality of people doing prompt engineering. They almost always rely on having a really big test set that has ground truth labels with a good metric that you can actually test your evolving prompts against. And that's almost never the case for people in production creating these models, unless you're like super sophisticated and have huge test sets. Most people actually have an idea, they implement the model, and they don't have any test cases and are actually doing this manual quick iteration of like refining your mental model of what you want your prompt to do in the system. So I think eventually the idea is as you gather more test cases and have more iterations of your prompt, you have more data to do more sophisticated evolution of your prompts and algorithms to optimize them. So that's the dream. But I think we want to meet people kind of where they really are today doing prompt engineering and be like, hey, we can get you off the ground started with some like more or less simple heuristics on how to improve your models. In long term, maybe once we have more and more data, we can start doing more intelligent optimization.
Yeah, it sounds like you're wearing your product hat.
So Zeno, the system we've been working on for a while, I think is very useful for doing this very deep evaluation. When you have large label test sets, you can do quantitative analysis and ablations. But this is something that we ran into all the time was people just don't have large evaluation sets, or they don't have metrics that actually correlate with the quality they care about. It's more about this creative process of you iterating and seeing what the output is and refining what you want the model to do. So that also influenced a lot of the design decisions.
Regarding the metrics, Andrew here is asking, can you have it harmonize all of the scores such that it has a meta score where it knows that, say, like a 4 out of 5 is roughly like an 8 out of 10?
If this is for the specific model, like the prompt that we were optimizing, probably. You could have it do whatever you wanted, really. It's as long as you define your spec well enough. And ideally, you have enough test cases that test the balance. If you meant the metric, right now, me and my collaborator, who's also Alex, have a debate right now. I'm arguing that we should have no metrics or labels by default, and it's just human judgment as you iterate. But there are some analyses that you need to do actually have an evaluation metric. Right now, we just support one evaluation metric which is character overlap, CHRF, between the label and the output.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go through quickly a couple of other ones. One, Vihan is asking, Alex, I imagine this will be very helpful to have AI suggestions on creating better prompts. And me and a friend have fine-tuned a ChatGPT instance created in the playground to do exactly this. However, from a business standpoint, I see this being a really costly solution for enterprises users where the primary LLM, if I may, is a RAG-based implementation and prompts refer to data in the attached databases for outputs. What are your thoughts?
I don't think I totally got the issue. Is this saying that like if you have a ton of inputs, it gets really expensive? Or if it's, I think if you have a RAG pipeline, like you usually have the individual prompts that are like, okay, take the top 5 results, put it in the prompt to actually synthesize an output. So that's a node, that's the LLM that you would optimize. And there, you don't have to optimize every possible RAG result. You would have a couple examples that already have the output scaffolded in, and you're changing things like how you should respond, like basically the text around the context that you're putting in. Yeah. So I see this as kind of like, I don't want to get in, like, I think people have a lot of ways of building their own pipelines, and it could be just raw OpenAI calls and they're passing strings along. Maybe they're using LangChain or something. And I think that's a great place for like code tools to do that orchestration. I think the lower level, like you can't get lower than the prompt that is this text function, text in, text out. And that's the thing that is being optimized in this case. I don't know if I answered that right, but
a few people have questions about that. I don't think we're gonna be able to tackle them all. I'm gonna put the link for the chat for you so that you could please.
Perfect.
Amit
Yes,
had a question. You have it. Okay, great. So Amit had a question, and productman@gmail.com had a question, and Apurva had another question.
Awesome.
I think we'd love to hear from you, Alex. This was a very lively. You've fomented the chat in a way that is wonderful. So
fantastic.
I hope that you get as much out of these questions as we all did seeing what you're building, and best of luck.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Endoftext.app. It's very early. I'd love any and all feedback. Please email me. There's a little help button everywhere that you can send. So really appreciate it. Thank you.